The video begins with a slow, reflective atmosphere. Soft music plays in the background as black and white footage of Billy Graham appears on the screen standing behind a pulpit, walking slowly with the help of a cane, smiling gently at the crowd. The narration introduces him not just as a preacher, but as a man who carried spiritual influence across generations. Billy Graham was trusted by millions, not because he claimed perfection, but because he consistently pointed people away from himself and toward faith, humility, and personal responsibility before God. As the visuals shift between packed stadiums and quiet moments from his later years, the narration explains that Graham's final chapter of life was marked by deep reflection. He was no longer focused on building movements or filling arenas. Instead, he spoke carefully, thoughtfully, and with the awareness that his words would outlive him. Every statement carried weight, shaped by decades of experience with world leaders, religious figures, and private conversations the public would never fully see. The tone remains calm as the narration clarifies that this story is not about controversy or attacking any individual or institution. It is about understanding the perspective of a man who dedicated his life to faith and truth. Billy Graham often warned that as people grow older, they see religion differently. The noise fades, the politics disappear, and what remains is the core question: what truly matters when life is nearing its end? Footage shows Graham seated in a simple room, speaking softly in interviews. The narration explains that in his final years he emphasized discernment more than ever. He believed many believers confuse faith with personalities and spirituality with authority. Graham often reminded his audience that even the most respected religious leaders are still human, still imperfect, and still accountable to God. This belief shaped how he spoke about global religious leadership, including the Pope. The scene subtly introduces the idea that Graham's truth was not dramatic or sensational. It was quiet, steady, and rooted in Scripture. He believed Christianity was not about elevating men, but about elevating God. Titles, traditions, and institutions, he said, should never replace personal faith. As the narration continues, visuals of open Bibles, candlelit churches, and individuals praying alone reinforce the message that true belief begins privately, not publicly. The music slightly fades as the narrator explains that Billy Graham's reputation for integrity made people listen closely, especially toward the end of his life. When he spoke, it wasn't to provoke outrage or create division. It was to remind believers to stay awake spiritually, to question respectfully, and to keep their faith centered on God rather than any single human authority. The scene ends with a powerful sense of anticipation. Billy Graham's image slowly fades, replaced by a quiet sunrise. The narration concludes by telling viewers that what Graham confirmed before his death was not a secret revelation, but a timeless reminder: faith must always be anchored in truth, humility, and personal conviction. This opening scene prepares the audience to listen carefully, not emotionally, to understand the deeper meaning behind his words. The second scene opens with a shift from reflection to explanation. The visuals show moments from Billy Graham's global ministry meeting presidents, standing beside world leaders, and speaking in international gatherings. The narration explains that Graham's unique position allowed him to observe how power of faith and influence often intersect. He was respected not only by ordinary believers, but also by some of the most powerful figures on earth. This gave him a rare perspective on religious authority and how easily it can shape, inspire, or mislead people. As the scene unfolds, the narration focuses on Graham's consistent message about leadership. He believed that true spiritual leadership should point people toward God, not toward the leader himself. In several interviews, Graham emphasized that when any religious figure becomes larger than the message of faith, something essential is lost. The visuals cut between large cathedrals, massive crowds, and quiet moments of prayer, reinforcing the contrast between outward grandeur and inward belief. The narration carefully explains that Billy Graham never spoke with bitterness about the Pope or the Catholic Church. Instead, he approached the topic with balance and restraint. He acknowledged that the Pope holds enormous influence over millions of believers worldwide. However, Graham believed influence must always be accompanied by humility. He often reminded people that no matter how respected a leader is, spiritual authority does not equal spiritual perfection. Every human being, regardless of title, stands equally in need of grace. The scene then turns slightly more personal. Footage shows Graham speaking gently, almost as if advising rather than preaching. The narration explains that he worried many believers rely too heavily on religious systems instead of developing their own relationship with God. According to Graham, faith should never be outsourced. Churches, leaders, and institutions are meant to guide, not to replace personal accountability and spiritual growth. As the visuals show individuals reading Scripture alone, the narration highlights Graham's belief that truth must be tested personally. He encouraged people to read, question, and reflect rather than accept teachings blindly. This applied to all leaders, including the Pope. Graham's message was clear: respect leadership, but never surrender discernment. Faith grows stronger when believers think deeply and seek understanding for themselves. The music softens as the narration emphasizes that Graham's views were shaped by decades of observation. He saw how devotion can sometimes turn into dependency. He warned that when believers attach their faith too closely to a single figure, disappointment becomes inevitable. Leaders can fail, change, or pass away, but faith rooted in God remains steady. This belief formed a foundation of what Graham quietly confirmed later in life. The scene closes with a calm but powerful reminder. The narration explains that Billy Graham's truth about the Pope was not meant to divide Christians, but to unify them around what truly matters. He believed unity should be based on shared faith in God, not on unquestioned loyalty to any human authority. As the screen fades to a soft light, viewers are left with a clear message. Respect leaders, learn from them, but place ultimate trust only in God. The third scene deepens the conversation by focusing on the responsibility of the believer. The visuals slow down, showing empty churches, quiet streets at dawn, and individuals sitting alone in reflection. The narration explains that in Billy Graham's later years, his greatest concern was not about specific leaders, but about how easily people surrender their own spiritual responsibility. He believed many believers look for certainty in figures of authority because personal faith requires effort, honesty, and courage. As the camera shows an open Bible resting on a wooden table, the narration emphasizes that Graham often returned to one central idea: faith must be personal before it can be communal. He warned that when people place their spiritual confidence entirely in institutions or leaders, they risk weakening their own connection to God. This was not an accusation, but an observation shaped by decades of ministry. Graham saw that even sincere believers can drift into spiritual comfort, allowing others to think and decide for them. The narration explains that Graham believed this issue extended across all branches of Christianity. He did not single out the Pope as unique in this regard. Instead, he used the Pope as an example of how easily a respected title can become a substitute for personal discernment. The visuals show large crowds listening silently, then transition to one individual praying alone. The contrast reinforces Graham's belief that crowds do not define faith, conviction does. As the scene progresses, the tone becomes more introspective. The narration explains that Billy Graham believed God never intended faith to be filtered entirely through another human being. He taught that scripture, prayer, and conscience are gifts meant to be used directly. Leaders may guide, but they should never replace a believer's own search for truth. According to Graham, when faith becomes dependent on authority, it becomes fragile. The visuals now show moments from Graham's sermons where he speaks calmly, without theatrics. The narration highlights that he often reminded people that even he himself should not be followed blindly. He encouraged listeners to test his words against scripture. This humility defined his approach and shaped his views on all religious leadership, including the Pope. Graham's message was consistent: trust God first, question respectfully, and never confuse reverence with surrender. The music grows quieter as the narration touches on Graham's understanding of human nature. He knew people desire certainty, structure, and reassurance. Leaders can provide that, but they can also unintentionally become spiritual shortcuts. Graham believed true faith is not always comfortable. It requires self-examination, patience, and sometimes doubt. But it is through that process that belief becomes genuine rather than inherited or borrowed. As the visuals fade into a sunset, the narration explains that this was the deeper truth Billy Graham confirmed before his death. He was not exposing secrets or challenging authority for attention. He was urging believers to wake up spiritually. His concern was that too many people confuse loyalty with faith and obedience with understanding. Graham believed God calls individuals, not crowds, and speaks to hearts willing to listen directly. The scene ends with a sense of quiet clarity. The final words remind viewers that Billy Graham's message was never about weakening respect for leaders, but about strengthening personal faith. He believed that when believers take responsibility for their own spiritual journey, faith becomes deeper, more honest, and more enduring. As the screen fades to black, the audience is left with a powerful reflection. True faith begins when reliance on titles ends and the search for truth becomes personal. The fourth scene shifts toward a broader warning about the future of faith in a modern world. The visuals show fast-moving city life, news headlines flashing across screens, and massive gatherings contrasted with quiet, empty churches. The narration explains that Billy Graham believed the greatest challenge for believers was not persecution, but distraction. In his later years, he observed that faith was becoming louder on the surface but weaker at the core, shaped more by culture, influence, and personalities than by genuine spiritual conviction. As the scene unfolds, the narration explains that Graham worried about how easily truth can be diluted when religion becomes intertwined with power. He believed that when faith is absorbed into institutions, politics, or global influence, it risks losing its spiritual center. This concern applied to all religious systems, not just one. The Pope, as one of the most visible religious figures in the world, symbolized this challenge not because of who he was, but because of what immense influence can do to belief. The visuals now show grand churches, ceremonies, and formal traditions. The narration clarifies that Graham respected tradition, but he believed tradition must serve faith, not replace it. He warned that rituals without understanding can become empty routines. According to Graham, when believers follow customs without questioning their meaning, faith becomes inherited rather than chosen. He believed God desires conviction, not repetition. The tone grows more serious as the narration explains that Billy Graham often spoke about accountability. He believed every believer will stand alone before God, not alongside their pastor, priest, or religious leader. Titles, positions, and affiliations will not speak on anyone's behalf. This belief shaped his view of all leadership, including the Pope. Graham emphasized that no leader, no matter how respected, can carry another person's faith for them. As the visuals slow, showing individuals pausing in thought, the narration highlights Graham's belief that faith should sharpen conscience, not silence it. He encouraged believers to ask difficult questions and to seek clarity rather than comfort. Graham believed blind loyalty is dangerous not because leaders intend harm, but because unquestioned authority weakens personal responsibility. He saw this as one of the most subtle threats to spiritual growth. The music softens as the narration reflects on Graham's understanding of legacy. Near the end of his life, he was not concerned with how history would remember institutions or titles. He was concerned with whether people truly understood their faith. He believed the future of Christianity depended not on strong leaders alone, but on thoughtful, spiritually awake individuals who could stand firm without needing constant guidance. The visuals transition to simple moments: someone opening a Bible, someone sitting in silence, someone walking alone at sunrise. The narration explains that Billy Graham believed these quiet moments mattered more than any public display of faith. He taught that belief is formed in solitude, tested in doubt, and strengthened through personal reflection. Leaders may inspire, but transformation happens privately. As the scene nears its end, a narration explains that this was the deeper meaning behind what Graham confirmed before his death. He was not diminishing the role of the Pope or any religious figure. He was reminding believers that no system, ceremony, or leader can replace a direct relationship with God. Faith, according to Graham, must be lived from the inside out. The scene closes with a calm but firm conclusion. Billy Graham's message was a call to awareness, not rebellion. He urged believers to respect leadership while remaining spiritually independent. As the screen fades, viewers are left with a quiet challenge to examine their own faith, not through the voice of another, but through truth, humility, and personal conviction. The final scene brings everything together with a calm sense of resolution. The visuals return to Billy Graham in his later years, his voice softer, his movements slower, yet his message clearer than ever. The narration explains that as Graham approached the end of his life, his focus narrowed to what he believed truly mattered. He was no longer concerned with debates, divisions, or labels. His concern was the soul of the believer and the future of faith beyond personalities, titles, and institutions. The narration reflects on how Graham understood legacy. He knew that religious leaders come and go, movements rise and fall, and institutions evolve over time. What remains constant, he believed, is the individual's relationship with God. This belief shaped the way he spoke about all religious authority, including the Pope. Graham did not seek to elevate or undermine anyone. Instead, he pointed beyond them, reminding believers that faith anchored in a human figure will always be limited. The visuals show a candle slowly burning, symbolizing time passing. The narration explains that Billy Graham believed one of the greatest mistakes believers make is confusing admiration with faith. Respecting a leader, he said, is natural, but replacing personal conviction with loyalty is dangerous. Graham warned that when belief becomes dependent on another person's voice, it becomes fragile. True faith, in his view, must be able to stand even when leaders are absent. As the scene continues, the narration highlights Graham's consistent call to humility. He believed humility was the missing element in much of modern faith. Leaders must remain humble, and believers must remain teachable. No one, regardless of title or influence, is above reflection, correction, or growth. This applied equally to pastors, evangelists, priests, and the Pope. Graham believed humility keeps faith alive and prevents it from turning into control or tradition without meaning. The visuals shift to people from different backgrounds praying quietly, alone. The narration explains that Graham believed God speaks most clearly when distractions are removed. Faith, he said, is not proven by crowds or ceremonies, but by conscience, character, and compassion. These were the qualities he hoped believers would pursue long after he was gone. The music becomes softer as the narration explains that before his death, Billy Graham confirmed a simple but powerful truth. No one can believe for you. No leader can carry your faith, answer for your choices, or stand in your place before God. This truth was not meant to divide Christians, but to mature them. Graham wanted believers to grow stronger, not more dependent. The visuals now show a sunrise breaking through darkness. The narration explains that Graham's final message was ultimately one of hope. He believed faith rooted in God alone is resilient. It does not collapse when leaders fail, change, or disappear. Instead, it deepens, becoming more honest and more personal over time. As the scene nears its end, the The narration reminds viewers that Billy Graham's life was a testament to pointing away from self and toward God, even in death. His message remained the same: trust God fully, respect leaders wisely, think deeply, and never stop seeking truth for yourself. The final image fades to silence. The closing words leave the audience with a quiet reflection. True faith is not inherited, borrowed, or delegated. It is chosen, lived, and carried personally. This was the truth Billy Graham stood by until his final breath, and the truth he believed every believer must eventually face.